Welcome to the regular meeting of the Audit Committee for February 12th. I am Elliot Payne, and I am the chair of this committee. At this time, I will ask the clerk to call the roll to verify a quorum for this meeting.
Committee member Abeni.
Present.
Chugtai is absent. Hosbein is absent. Omar is absent. Williams.
Present.
Vice Chair Singleton.
Present.
Chair Payne.
Present.
There are 4 members present.
Let the record reflect we have a quorum. Colleagues, our agenda is before us. I'm going to propose that we take item number 4 as the last item on the agenda, as staff is requesting a closed session pertaining to part of that report. May I have a motion to adopt the agenda, including the amendments to switch the order of items 4 and 5.
So moved.
Second. May the clerks call the roll.
Committee member Abeni. Williams. Vice Chair Singleton. Chair Payne.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
That carries, and the agenda is adopted, and we will consider item 4 as the final item of business. Next, we have acceptance of the minutes from our regular meeting of December 4th, 2023. May I have a motion to accept those minutes?
So moved. Second.
May the clerks call the roll.
Committee member Abeni.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Vice Chair Singleton.
Aye.
Chair Payne.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
That carries, and the minutes are accepted. Our next item of business is item 3, which is the annual adoption of the audit charter and independent statement. I will invite City Auditor Ryan Patrick to introduce this item.
Thank you, Chair Payne, and welcome to the committee.
Yeah.
And good to see everyone for the first meeting in the new year. Those of you who were on the audit committee last year will recall that we did adopt a charter. It's part of the required elements for the international professional practices of auditing. So this charter lays out how we conduct business, who's delegated authority to do what, and makes it clear to everybody watching kind of how we conduct ourselves and that we conduct ourselves in compliance with audit standards. I'll walk through the pieces of it and talk about why they're relevant, and then ask for a motion to adopt, or the chair will, I suppose. So the purpose, this is our high-level blueprint for how we work as an audit group, and it reiterates our independence via reporting lines, access to information, all the elements you see in the charter. And importantly for you all, it demonstrates your commitment to supporting our work. You are our oversight body. I report to you, as does staff. And through that unique reporting line, the only one in the city who reports to an independent committee, that's really what bolsters our work and our independence. So there's 4 elements: mission, standards, authority, and objectivity. So the standards were guided by the IPPF, or the International Standards for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing. The standards received a major overhaul this past year, and we'll work through adopting the new changes and incorporating them into our work. I'd note that one of the great things about the new changes is that the standards reflect government work now. They were very private sector oriented in the past, and now they do address government work more directly. Previously, the yellow book, or that set of standards, was more government focused. Now there's more uniformity, and it's good for us to have that stuff in the standards. Our authority, this is the critical piece for us: free, full, and unrestricted access to records, property, and personnel of all city departments, boards, and commissions in order to conduct audit work. If we don't have access to information, we're denied access to information as a part of our work, we can't very well conduct an audit. That's through the charter. The city charter provides us with some of that, but making sure that we recognize it here. Access to documents and records for funds that pass through. Access to you, the audit committee and senior management, and the necessary assistance from personnel who are doing the work to complete our audit. Objectivity, I report to you. I'm the department head who reports to a committee. That's unique in this city, and that's really what makes this a unique body, again. That recognizes the fact that this committee is now, and was starting last year, a majority non-elected body. So we have 4 community appointed members, our representative from the park board, and our 2 council members. And you oversee and supervise the work. So you are the ones who are kind of the check on us to make sure that we're performing our work in a reasonable and appropriate manner. We can't do certain things. So people who are working on audit work can't do other operational work. I think that makes sense. If you're working in finance and then also trying to audit finance, that's just not going to lend you to be independent. We can't do policies and procedures and transactions external to us. So if a policy or procedure applies to us, but HR creates it, we're not the ones adopting the policy per se. And we can't direct the activities of city employees who aren't employed by our office. That's not what we do. We don't tell people what to do. We issue findings in our reports, and it's up to management to make those corrections, not us. This is the new element. So all of the stuff I've described was in last year's adoption. This is the specific new element, and that is the creation of the Oversight and Evaluation Division. If you recall, last year we established the Policy and Research Division within the City Auditor's Office. You are delegating some responsibility to another body to work with this group. That's what makes the Policy and Research Division and the Oversight and Evaluation different, is that they are conducting different work from audit work. And although you supervise them and oversee the work of the entire office, through this charter, you are delegating some authority to them to work with council, because that's their primary audience is bringing forth information. And you'll hear more from them as the year goes on about their work. The Oversight and Evaluation Division was established, I believe, in October of last year, so it's a brand new body. They're getting their legs underneath them, and as they start to come into being, you'll hear more about their work and what's going on, but this grants them that authority to do that work, working directly with council. The language mirrors that in the ordinance, so if I didn't elaborate or create new sections of it, this is what the ordinance states. The second part of the items to be adopted is the independence statement. So this is a legal opinion of the city. This was issued by the city attorney. So this is, again, the interpretation of our city charter and the guiding ordinance to ensure that the audit function operates with complete independence. So again, important for us, important part of the standards is that nobody besides the audit team and specifically the auditors doing the work get to determine kind of the course of that work and the outcomes. So it's important to have that affirmative statement, not just us saying it, but the city saying that this is our legal position and interpretation of the charter. And committee adoption demonstrates your understanding and your commitment to it. So committed to fulfilling your mission as audit committee members. Again, operating with complete independence, subject to general oversight by the audit committee, but the city auditor's office is responsible for producing the work and solely responsible. And then you'll see the items listed. But again, this is reflecting the charter and the code. This is what the authority that we have as a group to do work. So those are the two items that we ask you to adopt as a part of our annual compliance with the standards. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Patrick. Are there any questions? Commissioner Bene.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I just want to say that so the independent statement, and that's new. It didn't exist before, but of course it doesn't conflict with the charter or ordinance. That's great. I think that a lot of I think at almost every meeting I've heard you reiterate the importance of the independence of this organization, and I think that's the right thing to do. I think sometimes forgetting to talk about that, mention that, keeping that front of mind would be a mistake, because it is unique and allows the city to really scrutinize itself and oversee its work in a way that's got a lot of integrity built into it. So I support you to continue reminding us that that's baked into what this committee's about. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bene. Any other questions? I'll just add, I was one of the authors of the Oversight and Evaluation Amendment to government structure, and coming on new as the chair this term, I was a member before we implemented the new government structure and then had to roll off, but now I'm back, and I'm just really excited about really strengthening the city auditor as a function as a whole. With this new government structure, now we have something that's more akin to federal. We have our executive and legislative branch, but we don't really have a judicial branch here locally. But I see the city auditor as kind of filling in that role of independent and objective analysis of, checks and balances within the new government structure. So I'm really glad to see how these are starting to formalize and take shape. So thank you. Can I get a motion to adopt this?
So moved.
Thank you. Clerk, please call the roll.
Committee Member Abeni.
Aye.
Williams.
Aye.
Vice Chair Singleton. Chair Payne.
Aye.
There are 4 ayes.
That carries, and that item has been approved. We will proceed to item 5 on the agenda, which is an update from the Office of the City Auditor on work in progress. I will invite our Director of Internal Audit, Siddhartha Pudyal, to introduce that presentation.
Good morning, Chair Payne and members of the Audit Committee. I'd like to provide an update on all the projects that Audit Division has been working right now. First of all, the contents of the presentation. So we have one completed audit, property and evidence, which we'll discuss later in detail. And also we are working on 5 other projects which are in progress right now. And I'll also provide an update on investigations that have been going on in Audit Division, as well as the prior issue follow-up as well. So the first one is the completed audit. It's called like property and evidence audit. So as a part of the audit, we reviewed the processes and controls around property and evidence to ensure that they're operating effectively. And we'll discuss this in detail regarding the audit and the findings later part of the presentations. And the next one is IT outage after action review. So that's still in progress. So the objective of this audit was to review the city's response to the outage, assess the outage impact on city departments, examine factors that may have contributed to the outage, and identify ways for the city to mitigate any certain events as well. So this is the non-public audit, and we contracted our external consultant, Wildcard Corp, to work on this audit, and so the audit is still ongoing. So Wildcard Corp is working with the IT group as well to figure out what's the best solution going forward. So that's still in progress for now. So the next one is the facilities management audit. So we're in the field work of that audit right now. The objective of that audit is to review the effectiveness and efficiency of controls around cities' facilities, maintenance and repairs. So primarily we're focusing on the maintenance and repairs portion of the facilities management on this audit. So basically we're looking at the governance structure and policy and procedures oversight, and how do they prioritize any repairs that come in request, and also focus on the training portion of the for all the foremen and other staff that are part of the facilities right now. So that's on in field work right now. So the next one is the Neighborhood Safety Departmental Risk Assessment Consultation. So this is a risk assessment, and we work with Director Luana Nelson Brown and her key staff to establish and conduct a departmental risk assessment, an activity that self-identifies. So basically, we had like multiple meetings with Director Brown and also her staff to figure out what kind of programs they have within those programs, what kind of sub-programs, and all those processes and risk related to sub-programs. So we basically walk through with one of the programs, and then right now we're just giving them time to identify other programs as well. And once that's completed, we'll follow up with them and then work with them to identify all the risk and controls they have related to their programs, and then help them like how they should go about managing those risks that have been identified in the program. So right now, I'd say it's still in fieldwork stage of the audit. So the next one is the PCARD audit, and still in planning stage. So the objective of this audit is to determine whether controls for the administration and monitoring of the purchasing card program are in place and functioning as intended to reduce the potential fraud, waste, and abuse. So we recently issued the scope memo for this audit, but we still have some planning to complete. So once we do that, we'll go into the fieldwork at some point later in the month. So the next project is related to officer injured on duty. So the objective of this project is to review data pertaining to officers injured on duty and analyze for trends. So basically, as a part of the analysis, we're looking at the injuries on duty and also related to COVID-19 and also related to like PTSD as well. So basically, we're just looking at might be the contributing factors for these injuries, and to identify if there are any issues that lie within those injuries as well, so that we can better plan any future audits related to officers injured on duty. So when we perform the annual risk assessment and annual plan for the next audit committee meeting, so these are the information that we'll be utilizing to try to come up with the future audits as well. So at this time, if you have any questions related to the audit.
Thank you for that report. Commissioner Singleton.
I still have others to present. So just for these audits, if you have any questions.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Payne, and thank you for the presentation thus far. I just had a quick question on the facilities management audit, and could you talk about whether and how that audit would be informed by other facilities issues that have come up in previous audits?
So basically, as a part of the audit, we're also looking at, because there has been like external assessment that has been performed related to city buildings and whatnot. So we, so this audit was was planned as a part of the annual audit plan last year. So basically, we compiled that information as a part of the annual risk assessment, and so my understanding is this will be like a multi-phase audit, but at this point, we're just focusing on the repairs and maintenance and how they prioritize those requests. So it's based on those external assessments as well as our own internal risk assessment as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll also note for the record that Commissioner Chugtai has also joined us.
All right, so moving on so right now, audit is overseeing like 4 open investigation related to fraud, waste, and abuse. So this is we have one additional investigation compared to last audit committee meeting. So in total, we have 4 right now, and based on the nature of the investigation, we can't divulge too much detail. So I just wanted to provide that information to you that right now we're just reviewing the total 4 investigations. Now the prior audit issue follow-up for the audits we have already completed. So in total, we have 29 open audit issues, including the 11 issues that will come out from that property and evidence audit as well. And we have 11 overdue audit issues, meaning, so basically by the time the management said they're going to complete those issues has not been completed. So so those are the overdue, and 8 of them are part of the 2 audits. So primarily based on like those 2 audits, the majority number of outstanding issues are based off those 2 audits. And also there are 17 audit issues that are validations in progress, meaning that the management has already provided the documents to audit. So we're in process of validating some of those documents to make sure that the response plan has been completed accurately and 100%. So we're working on that one as well. And out of those 17 validations, 14 has been part of the 2022 hiring and promotion process audit, as well as 2022 internal investigation process audit. So these are the list of the reports that are still open, and we're following up on all these audits and issues related to them. Do you have any questions related to the investigation and the prior audit issues?
Not seeing any.
All right. Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to invite City Auditor Ryan Patrick to provide an update regarding the Policy and Research Division. Thank you.
Thank you.
Andrew Hawkins has been leading this work. He couldn't be here today, so I'm filling in. I'll answer questions to the best of my capability, but he apologizes for not being able to make the meeting today. Providing a recap from 2023, given that this was a new program initiated and I think staffed in February and March. We're able to complete quite a bit of work in 2023. It's a bit of a look back given it's the first meeting. And this information you can find online, so if you're interested in looking at the reports, visit the City Auditor webpage. The reports are listed up there. Completed 12 policy briefings ranging from auto theft to pet waste composting to vendor supplies by the city. So really quite a wide breadth of research done by the Policy and Research Group. These policy briefings are shorter kind of white papers that are provided to council members upon request. And they also completed 6 full presentations, so legislative department's landscape analysis, a longer auto theft deterrence presentation, and an overview of participatory budgeting. So again, I encourage you, if you haven't, I know the council members receive these presentations in public. I'd encourage you to go on the website and anyone who's interested to see what's up there. From the administrative side, the Policy and Research Division have developed a policy and procedure manual. They're working on finalizing it. That'll be, again, a public document. They've created a request portal, and they are designing, and will soon be, if it hasn't already been implemented, have a portal and Tableau dashboard online that makes it very easy to see what they're doing in real time, link back to reports, provide a great deal of transparency to their process, because what they do is produce information both for the council's benefit but also for the public's benefit as we go about discussing some key issues for the city. Happy to answer questions if I can. Looking forward, they're conducting trainings for new council members and staff, learning from that year one to improve their process. And then they have a fair amount of work in the hopper. I know it's all listed. A lot of the motions are listed on the website, but working hard.
Thank you for that presentation. Any questions? I'll just say it's really awesome to see all that work laid out in one spot. And, I've made requests for some of those policy briefings, and they've been really thorough and comprehensive. So just to see the volume of work in just the short time that they've been around is pretty impressive. So thank you for that.
All credit to that team. They're working very hard.
Seeing no further questions, I will direct the clerk to receive and file that report. Our final item of business is item 4, which is receiving the property and evidence audit report. That report will be presented by Community Safety Auditors Travis Kam and Ryan Franzen. Welcome.
Thank you, Chair Payne, members of the Audit Committee. Thank you for having us today. Today I'm going to be talking about the property and evidence audit, which has been kind of a long time coming. And before I begin, I just want to thank the property and evidence management MPD for their involvement and really working with us. This was a very intensive engagement. We began this one, really kind of began planning last summer, kind of jumped into fieldwork in the fall, and spent a lot of time out at property and evidence warehouse doing hands-on, and they're willing and open for us to kind of come in, kind of look at everything, ask questions, learn a lot about the process. This is kind of added to the audit plan as part of the engagement, as part of the risk assessment, as kind of a request by management to come in and kind of look at the processes. And today I can answer questions related to our audit work and kind of the stuff we did, but I also have Tristan Hammerberg, the manager of the property and evidence unit, Sam Daly, the supervisor, and then also Assistant Chief Katie Blackwell. And I also want to thank Forensic Division Director Shannon Johnson and also William Vincent of the Property and Evidence Unit for really taking the time to kind of go work with us, kind of put together kind of a collaborative project in that way. So, let's see. So today, kind of got some context and kind of the scope. Kind of talk a little bit some general process overview, and kind of go into some other items of note before we kind of get into some of the observations, and then we'll kind of save to the end a couple non-public audit issues for closed session. Okay. So the objective of this project was to review the processes and controls around property and evidence to ensure they were operating effectively. The time frame we took for this one was we did from about 2017 through current. There was an audit done by the internal audit back in 2017. That's kind of why we kind of chose kind of what has occurred since then. The scope included property and evidence processed and stored by the unit through the permanent storage of final disposition. We also focused on units in which the property and evidence unit is responsible for, so kind of generally starting from item intake to kind of disposition. Once items kind of get submitted to the property and evidence unit, kind of how they handle and kind of how they approach through there. We also, phased out some other, not including the scope, review custody of the impound lot, and then evidence store like an evidence.com, so just pictures, body-worn camera footage, and other items there. As kind of I alluded to back in December during the sexual assault examination kit special project follow-up audit report, there's kind of some overlap in that one as well, in that we phased out sexual assault examination kits kind of specifically into that project, also kind of, doing this larger audit. And then kind of for the process and scope, there's a lot of cast a wide net, kind of narrowed down based on risk and kind of process area, and kind of focused on, kind of some of the key risks and kind of the key areas that we could test. There's a lot of different processes, a lot of different areas for this one, kind of, using our audit work, kind of our judgment, kind of, focused on about 40 different testing work papers that we did, which is kind of one of our larger audits that we did, just kind of based on the whole scheme of the unit. And then kind of for the scope, so kind of as in the scope memo, you can kind of see basically we looked at governance, looking at policies and procedures in place. We looked at oversight monitoring, roles and responsibilities. And then we kind of looked at, specific processes, including, item intake, item storage, item disposition to ensure they're consistent and adequately documented. We evaluated how items are designated for disposition, which is basically kind of how the final disposal or destruction or sale, kind of the final outcome of the item. Look if they're operating effectively. We looked at controls and processes in place to ensure they're adequate in line with best practices. We determined where and how items are stored and whether items are properly stored and located within the warehouse. So we did inventory sampling of items as part of this one. We assessed the sufficiency and appropriateness of the storage conditions, and we evaluated how staff are trained to properly handle property and evidence. And then kind of safety and security, so we reviewed security measures in place, and then also looked at items such as continuity operation plans and other planning items in regards to event emergencies, disruptions, continuing operations. So kind of the background, kind of some general overview. There's kind of a lot of different processes kind of that, might occur, but we just kind of a summary here. Basically, the property and evidence unit is responsible for keeping items safely stored, maintaining items as needed for court proceedings, and returning property to owners as permitted by law. It's a civilian unit staffed within MPD, part of the forensics division since the department reorganization last year. And they also, handle evidence and found and safekeeping property. So found and safekeeping property are items that are found across the city. Owner might be known, owner might not be known. Just kind of a general backpack like that left in the park, or other items that kind of come in and flow throughout the unit that officers bring in. They also operate a property and evidence warehouse that serves both officers, investigators, and the public. So they return items to there through people, and then also, that's where items are brought by officers, investigators, other MPD employees. And since 2020, they've consolidated and moved into one location, which is also kind of why we kind of figured it's kind of a good time now to take a look at it, as prior to 2020, they were kind of scattered across a couple of different locations, and now they've been in kind of one central location for a couple of years now. Kind of as to how items get to the property and evidence warehouse. They can be transported directly to the warehouse and submitted through lockers by officers, investigators. Also, all the precincts and public service buildings also have temporary storage lockers where items that aren't restricted. So items besides guns, drugs, cash, jewelry, some of those high-risk items can be placed, and the property and evidence service staff can come and collect the items and bring it to the warehouse. And then basically, in terms of, depending on the item, there's different packaging requirements. There's envelopes, there's different packaging equipment available for officers and staff to package items and label items. They go to, MPD has the MPD policy and procedure manual, which kind of outlays, for some specific type of items. And there's also a packaging manual for officers in terms of, how to handle alcohol, for example, how to handle this drug item. The item is documented and the location is entered in PIMS. All items are assigned to have a corresponding property report number and associated with a case number to kind of identify and kind of track the item. And then once it gets to the property and evidence warehouse, staff go through an intake process, confirming the details and kind of designating a storage location for the item. Items are generally stored, high-risk items are stored within higher security areas, such as, gun vault or drug vault, where there's restricted access for those. And then there's also kind of the general storage, and then there's, storage, for example, homicide items or other items in terms of the warehouse. So depending on the item and the status is where it ends up. And then those items can also be transferred out on a regular basis. It may go to the crime lab at the city, the BCA court, kind of elsewhere in terms of, for testing. Other agencies might, if there's another case, it might be transferred out of the warehouse, items might be transferred in. There's kind of that ebb and flow as well in terms of the process. And then kind of disposition determination, so kind of how the final outcome of an item. And we'll kind of talk a little bit about more this coming up, but basically, the responsible authority is the case investigator or the unit commander of for items associated with evidence. So they're the ones, who have that kind of main authority to kind of update the disposition, such as releasing an item back to owner or, keeping it for a certain amount of time. Property and evidence management also have the authority, and they also go through and, update case dispositions and look at, the case information, look at the details, and kind of, determine whether or not an item needs to be held. And then, part of that process, when items, are no longer need to be held, staff attempt to notify owners, notifying them that, the item is ready to be collected at the property and evidence warehouse, and kind of giving them that key details to come and collect it. Some items, such as those related to homicide or sexual assaults, may be held indefinitely, and the dispositions depending on the item type. So, found and safekeeping property, kind of those items that are found or that were lost or, kind of get there that aren't evidence. Per statute, those items are held for 60 days. Staff attempt to notify the owner, and then, items after that point are either destroyed or kind of held for auction by the unit. So firearms go through a little bit more of a process through the firearm release unit in MPD, where there's additional review of the case, whether an item can be released or not, and then there's a background check as well to ensure that the owner or whoever's receiving the item, the gun, is eligible to have firearms in that process. And then, in terms of destruction, so Just kind of some examples, kind of depending on the item, but firearms and drugs and narcotics are transported off-site to be destroyed. At the warehouse, other items such as clothing, for example, electronics, would be destroyed by staff there. Per policy, there to render it useless or kind of render it valueless. Items of value such as jewelry, tools, gift cards, anything kind of related to there. The property and evidence unit maintains items and kind of holds periodic auctions to kind of get some of that value back to the city for those items that are there. And then cash too kind of gets swept into the city's account. So kind of, next kind of just have a couple other items to note. These are ones, items that not necessarily audit issues, but things that maybe were not in the original scope, but kind of came up in discussion. Items that require coordination, longer with other agencies or kind of statute things impacting the unit. And just kind of some things that impact that we've discussed with them and kind of wanted to highlight in here. We kind of got about 8 of those. So kind of first is retention schedules, case disposition updates. One thing is, there's often unclear retention requirements for evidence. There's different requirements depending on the item type, associated cases, adjudication, and other factors. There is some state statute language kind of depending on, that describes, so some items, if an item can be, how long an item has to be held, generally might be till under the sentence, but those are generally for items with convictions or items with, a court outcome. Might not always be a case with items. Management has described efforts, where they have, to provide standardization and best practices regarding evidence retention across the state. There's kind of some working with through management has kind of been working with kind of as part of a work group to kind of as a statewide kind of effort to kind of figure out some of this kind of provide some clarity here. Current practices I think we noted kind of in terms of our audit work we had to take into account was that current practices require knowledge of the various statutes and standards and kind of time spent researching cases to kind of make those determinations. And then also in here, per MPD policy, investigators kind of have that first disposition authority and kind of what you enter in kind of when a case is completed or when an item no longer has to be held, but that's kind of a manual process and requires watching, tracking cases, going into the system, updating that. If there's turnover, someone has to be manually assigned to a new investigator to be able to make those determinations. So there's a lot of items and kind of something that we noted. There's items that probably might not necessarily could be released, or kind of items in that kind of that standard of having to go through a regular review by management or others to kind of release them or kind of determine if they're no longer to be held. As so some items in the system that have the state statute or kind of have a disposal data authorized for destruction date, but that's not all items. And through as I kind of talk a little bit at the end, some items such as drugs or kind of guns is kind of some regular reviews, but for the other items it kind of takes time and effort from management at the unit to kind of go through and determine whether or not if an item needs to be held or not. Something too we noted is item inventories and storage locations. So there's still a large number of items that are identified as being stored in City Hall. Management's kind of been going through a review process, such as with the sexual assault kits, firearms, to kind of update the system when items are transferred over from previous storage locations. They were kind of put in the location, but it still requires it's just a manual effort to kind of go through and review the details. A lot of these items might be in the older System 2 capers, which was phased out in 2018, and kind of going through and confirming, the updating the storage locations. Management indicates it's going to take a number of resources and kind of a significant amount of time yet to be able to kind of go through. I think, one area is, for example, firearms right now, where they've been, trying to identify and update those information and storage locations. Drug testing. So preliminary drug testing may occur at the warehouse. While there are safety precautions in place, the room is not specialized for drug testing where it currently occurs. It doubles as kind of a storage vault for other evidence where kind of a store, and then there's kind of a separate setup for kind of this testing to occur. For this one, we kind of encourage MPD to, especially now with kind of the reporting to the forensic division, kind of work with the forensic division and kind of identify potential solutions, potential solutions kind of practices regarding drug testing to kind of either be a separate room or kind of a separate storage location, which might require resources as well, or kind of other options to ensure that the process is kind of in a secure and safe and kind of within where it's occurring. There's also recent assessment reports, which we kind of allude to a little bit in issue 4 warehouse maintenance, but we kind of noted that there's been several recent outside facility assessment reports through MPD, not just covering the property and evidence warehouse, but through the whole department kind of in its facilities. And we kind of encourage MPD to go through and kind of prioritize, determine costs, kind of come up with estimates, kind of just allude to some of our audit issues as well. But in terms of prioritization, kind of a budget process, kind of ensure that, items that are most, or items in the reports, that are the most risk, or pose the most risk, or pose the most potential harm, kind of prioritize and kind of remediate in a timely manner. Cannabis policy, so kind of wanted to allude to a little bit of this one as well, as there's been recent, loosening or legalization on the state level of certain amounts and, certain practices there. And then the current practice of property and evidence warehouse, no drugs or narcotics besides prescription medications are released kind of through all items that we destroyed. But there's been, in requests, kind of increasing conversation regarding, the potential of releasing cannabis or other, cannabis back to the owners. Kind of as a statewide thing, not unique to the property and evidence unit, but I think there's kind of the idea of everyone's waiting for someone to kind of make that determination or kind of make that stand of, how these items will be handled. Currently, cannabis comes in, it's kind of handled like any other drug, and, the people are told, no, it's, can't return it or can't release it back to the unit, because that kind of carries, potential consideration and legal risk as well in terms of releasing items like that back. Another kind of new recent update, extreme risk protection order procedures. This kind of came up in our conversations and kind of our work as well. There's been recent state statute changes, and the report kind of mentions a little bit more kind of the specific state statutes that kind of got changed or got updated, part of mostly kind of end of January 1st, 2024. But there's in there, that involves, potential surrendering of firearms through, a law enforcement agency or kind of a federally licensed firearms dealer. In the past, there's been kind of practices where people could surrender firearms, but, now there's kind of additional requirements regarding potential reimbursement of, if a person no longer wants a firearm back, for example, potential reimbursement of the cost, as well as not being able to charge stores costs for those firearms now, which kind of requires, a new, kind of it's unclear yet kind of how it's going to impact the city, but I think it's going to be kind of an intersection of, MPD, city attorneys, and kind of a larger kind of work group to kind of, determine, how the city is going to respond and kind of, these practices. For example, if the city is to, someone were to, surrender a firearm and the city is to reimburse them for that cost, for example, if, some of these other new things, as the law kind of becomes clear and the impact becomes clearer. Contaminated cash collection process, something we also want to note, kind of a, cash that is contaminated with biological fluids, generally blood or kind of other items, not have to go through a special deposit process, kind of through the banks and kind of through the treasury. Property and evidence has been making kind of recent efforts to go through that process and kind of get cash deposit and kind of get value out of it, but there's been kind of a breakdown and kind of the request been rejected lately. So there's kind of that build up right now of contaminated cash, kind of, in terms of, following the special submission process that, has to be followed, and there's kind of unclear, where, kind of why that, not being kind of accepted. So there's kind of ending up back to property and evidence warehouse. And then something to employee background check, just something we wanted to note is that, new employees, we go through employee background check. There's different levels within MPD of kind of the standards, due to background check constraints, they can't share specific details with managers, just kind of a general pass and no. But, there's been, due to the nature of the job and kind of increasing practice kind of across some places to kind of do, recurring background checks potentially on employees, such as every 5 years or so to kind of make, determine whether or not there is, something that's come up regarding, financial or kind of drug abuse or kind of some of those red flags that might occur that, management kind of might not be aware of, because, especially when it comes to handling property and evidence, there's access through, drugs, cash, all sorts of potential items that, most jobs don't have access to in that way. But just kind of something to potentially explore is kind of, potentially, doing kind of some of that, having opportunities to kind of do some of those kind of consistent oversight or kind of regular check-ins, be certain to ensure, that nothing is untoward happening or that nothing, those red flags or kind of some other items aren't kind of popping up in that way. And next, I'm going to kind of get into the audit issues. So we'll kind of start with issue 4. And we did have, a number of high audit issues. We also we had some moderate, and then we had 4 that were low that we'll kind of get through at the end. And kind of the first one here today So warehouse maintenance is kind of alluded to a little bit already. We did noted that the warehouse is in need of some long-term effective maintenance solutions. I think there's been areas of maintenance and repairs, but sometimes not addressed completely. I think the one item for here that we noticed that the roof has recurring leaks. Even while we're kind of out there, we know that there'll be people out there who kind of noted be sometimes the use of tarps, kind of the use of buckets. There's been patchwork repairs in terms of, but the water kind of will find its way in at kind of another time, and then they have to call out, kind of repair that way. There's kind of that long-term solution of a need to, really kind of solidify that. The building that is moved into was an older building that was repurposed for the property and evidence warehouse, so it's not a new building at the city per se, but there's kind of that recurring, we identified there's some other items such as cracks in the floor, and then kind of the recent assessment reports where, a number of other areas such as lighting or kind of the fire fire control systems kind of have been identifying those reports of kind of other items of potential maintenance. So basically, kind of we recommend here as property and evidence work with and MPD work with property services to identify the expected costs, potential solutions for some of the items, particularly the roof, kind of determining a long-term solution cost or kind of a more permanent solution for that item. And then, in accordance with other work, prioritize those decisions. And then kind of the management action plan, so kind of more detail in the report, but, they've noted that water leaks have been regular issues that's moving into the facility. They've taken measures through such as large buckets, other containers to collect water, and, tarps to prevent items from being damaged. And each time a new leak is discovered, property services is notified, and a roofing contractor is dispatched. And as items may be initially stopped with water leaks, but that longer-term solution is needed. MPD is in the process of researching and discussing costs and potential options. Through some other items they've responded, such as floor cracks, have been some work through property services as well as overhead doors and downspouts, kind of some of those longer-term ones. And something to note is that other items other items identified in the facilities audit rely on budgetary solutions to address. So kind of that, depending on priority and budget for those responses. Items chucked out, so issue 5, so there are not consistent regular review of items chucked out of the property and evidence warehouse. Something we noted that there's, several thousand items kind of going back through a couple of decades that have been marked as chucked out of the property and evidence warehouse that, according to the system, are still currently chucked out. They might be at, court or kind of generally, court office or kind of along those lines. There's not currently a regular review process to, check those items and confirm that items are with the custodial agency and the records in alignment, and kind of, a process to ensure that items are kind of on a regular basis kind of receive items back. It was noted that, some court systems, for example, might have their own kind of property and evidence warehouse, and, items would just kind of be stored there, and, until there's that request or kind of until there's, action kind of getting those items back. But we did kind of note, just based on the number and kind of the time period, there's that larger number of items that are out there according to the system, through some agency. The recommendation is that, we recommend that property and evidence management review reports of all items chucked out at the property and evidence warehouse and request inventory records of the agency's assigned custody, and then document and kind of resolve discrepancies and make sure that those records are in alignment. And then, through the regular work, through that kind of alluded to a little bit before, of updating records and kind of storage locations, make corrections through PIMS, through the system of some of these items. And then kind of the management action plan for this one. So kind of as detailed in the audit report, but items checked out by other individuals or agencies are not returned to the property and evidence unit has been a longstanding concern of the property and evidence management. Items checked out to Hennepin County Court are sometimes returned at the conclusion of judicial proceedings. The circumstances when the court determines to maintain custody of evidence and is retained by the district court, requests are made by property and evidence management to the district court when reviewing older cases, and it is determined that items may not have been returned. As we do a complete inventory of property and evidence and learn that something is checked out and not returned, we'll make a request to the agency. From the results of this audit, we will develop a more regular process of querying items checked out and follow up for the return. And due date kind of the end of June for this item. Issue 6, so evidence continuity. So we noted the evidence continuity field is not always properly logged by officers in PIM, so this was kind of one that we know kind of when items were being received at property and evidence warehouse. When officers receive an item, they're to enter the information in PIMS and then per evidence continuity, say that they place it within a storage locker, from scene to, property and evidence warehouse, or, from scene, or from, this location to X location. We noted that, for items, from the officer's side, there's not always logged by them. There should be that initial kind of confirmation. Sometimes, oftentimes, items are noted in the sample. For this one, we kind of noted exceptions would be there'd be the first location would be kind of entrance by property evidence unit staff that they have the item, from picking up through a locker. It kind of noted it kind of appeared mostly kind of a lot of times with cases such as in backpacks or other bags where officers are to remove or individually remove the items, individually inventory the items, per chain of custody to, say that document all those items. Sometimes there'll just be a backpack, for example, or, then property and evidence would kind of go through, or items would be, sometimes they're noted in the system where they'd be located or found. And we kind of had to rely on case reports and kind of other information to kind of determine, where an item, a lot of times it'd be noted within the corresponding details, that this item is located and kind of submitted to property and evidence. But in terms of the PIMS, since 2018, we kind of noted that there's, a number of exceptions to those items. So this one, we recommended that MPD management communicate to staff expectations around evidence continuity, entries in PIMS, both through written communication and through reminders at precincts, including to properly inventory each item in PIMS, complete the necessary fields, separate out and inventory items separately, according to the item type, or, that were found in other items, such as, items found in backpacks. Kind of take that time, take that effort to kind of go through and ensure that those items are placed there, and kind of, also place reminder signage similar to, some of the other signage, encouraging our officers to ensure that that item, that line in PIMS is submitted. For this one, property and evidence management kind of noted, a response into this one about, our staff at MPD are expected in training in the use of the PIM system. Property and evidence management is invited to attend training and to kind of instruct recruits and cadets and others regarding how to enter items and how to use PIMS. Property and evidence unit staff for the first time of quality assurance for items submitted through the unit. Staff make corrections as necessary and document items located in bags, pockets, and other containers. These items are then documented in the property report. For this one, we did speak through MPD as well, through the deputy chief about give response in terms of through the deputy chief of patrol about sending reminders through officers. So we kind of for kind of an update on this one, we communicate kind of the MPD update. We audit communicated with MPD and was informed that MPD has notified inspectors of this topic and was sent out a department-wide memo highlighting the importance of inventorying each item separately and the risks associated with not doing so. As there are 500, couple hundred officers, kind of a lot of investigators who are entering property and evidence, kind of property and evidence we're alluding to by the time it kind of gets to them. It's kind of that first step in the quality assurance, but kind of starts. For this one, we kind of identified the that root cause of kind of starting at that property and evidence where when the officers are submitting the items, kind of going along with that training and those reminders. Next one, we have PIMS data entry, kind of a little bit related to this one, kind of the last one, but there are inconsistencies in item description and temporary evidence locations in PIMS. So as a lot of officers, a lot of people going through the process of entering items, that they receive, such as jewelry or, those items, that, it's not always consistent, with the format that's used, such as, golden colored watch or gold watch, or kind of some of those discrepancies that we noted. We also noted that, when it goes to storage locations, that, when items are entered into temporary storage locations, there's a wide range of item storage locations that are used, and a lot of times it's, variations of the same place, and with, different formats that are used. Sometimes there's misspellings. I do kind of have, just kind of some examples that we kind of noted. There's over 4,000 temporary storage locations that were used in 2023, and just kind of, ones that kind of all are kind of that same place, but, with just kind of the ones that, per the reports, how they have been entered in, as it's kind of an open field in PIMS right now, through that temporary storage location. You kind of, something we noticed, kind of, there's that different variation in use of formats. Per policy, they're supposed to, enter a locker number, kind of a more specific location, but also noted that there's wide variation. Sometimes it'd be a number, number sign. Sometimes it'd be 0. There's just kind of, which may kind of analyzing data, kind of looking at that trends a little bit. From an audit perspective, a little more challenging as we kind of had to filter through, different variations such as this on the report. Basically, we recommended that MPD management explore upgrade to PIMS, such as the use of drop-down boxes with pre-filled options. If that is not feasible, other options such as barcode scanners for storage locations or other reminders or kind of locations to ensure that try to provide some more consistency in some of this information in PIMS. And then also kind of similar to the last one, kind of communicating to officers, ensuring that everyone is kind of aware of kind of the best practice of the standards, kind of what should be followed in terms of those items. For this one, we got a Property and Evidence Management noted that they agreed with this audit and this finding. This request from the PIMS was initiated in 2018. The property warehouse, precinct lockers, and the PSB Public Service Building currently have signs indicating the evidence continuity location. Officers getting latitude to determine free-form data entry. When training for cadets, recruits, and lateral officers occurs, Property and Evidence Management stresses the importance of a specific location for evidence continuity in PIMS. Something that kind of for the MPD update that, kind of noted that this one kind of transcends, a couple of different divisions with MPD. So we, our recommendation requires a coordination of, the business technology unit, property and evidence, kind of some of these other units to determine potential solutions. And then it's kind of noted that, potentially the drop-down boxes may not be a technical solution within PIMS, but, there might be options such as the scanners or kind of other items. So we kind of will, encourage them to kind of explore those solutions, and we'll kind of report back to the future audit committee as we kind of, receive a more formal kind of response and kind of the limitations for this one as, I think potential drop-down boxes, some other things kind of require some coordination, kind of want to kind of have confirmation of what, that some of those long-term solutions might be. Safekeeping item disposition. So PIMS records for items stored in safekeeping stores are not always updated when items are disposed or moved. So something that during testing we noted, due to the nature of how safekeeping items are stored and kind of how they're turned over, within 60 days, it's pretty easy to kind of tell, what items, the oldest item there kind of versus the newest item there. That's kind of how we noted versus on the inventory reports versus on what was on the shelf, that those items on the inventory reports that were listed as still being stored there, but based on the shelving unit and kind of being able to easily identify, the oldest item there. There's a couple dozen items that we noted, a variety of items that had been marked of disposed of in PIM, or not been marked disposed of in PIMS, but based on kind of the location, were there. A couple of items were located by management elsewhere in the warehouse, and it's presumed that most of the items have been disposed of within the original batch. Kind of how safekeeping other items are stored, there's a number of bar tags kind of for each individual item, and kind of had to scan each one as kind of go through the system, and we kind of could tell based on kind of some of the stuff that other items within the batch, such as if there was a pack, something in a backpack, for example, there would be other items within the property report that had been marked disposed of, that but just not those specific items. And kind of with that, we noted that was not a defined regular process review, and then kind of identify those discrepancies. So we encourage, property and evidence management, just, train and work with staff to ensure that when items are disposed, that all barcodes, kind of all those labels are scanned and entered in correctly. And then on, a regular, consistent basis, kind of based on how quickly the safekeeping items turn over and kind of the ability to kind of quickly tell, where items are at, review items stored versus record reports, and kind of review, kind of determine if there's any discrepancies and kind of remediate those on that more timely basis. Manage an action plan. They say that they agree with this finding. Most items are kind of saying again that most items are likely released within other items in the same case, but the barcode is not scanned correctly. This audit brought to attention the need to pay closer attention to regular review of the storage area. A monthly review would be instituted so that errors are discovered in a more timely fashion. And then Property and Evidence Management has addressed the need for attention to detail when scanning barcodes for all items in custody. Particular note has been made to verify all barcodes before updating PIMS within a case, and Property and Evidence personnel will continue to work towards zero errors. So potential due date for this one of a mediation deadline of June on this one. Something else we noted was conflicts of interest. So, we noted there's not specific conflicts of interest policies and procedures related to the handling of property and evidence at the Property and Evidence Warehouse. The city has an ethics policy, and then MPD has, some language regarding ethics as well, and kind of, those practices. But in regards to, specific actionable items of handling property and evidence, in order that the city's ethics one is kind of mostly financial, and kind of, the disclosures are required of kind of upper level, kind of the city leaders versus, in terms of this one, we were noting, staffing levels and kind of, the others at the unit. How would you identify, how would you know if there's a conflict of interest? How would you report it up? What would management do in terms of, action on that item of, such as, segregating and kind of that way. And we kind of noted conflicts of interest for employees, such as, if there's an item or a case associated with them or kind of a close friend or acquaintance, we kind of noted that, there should be kind of some specific guidelines that can be acted upon. So again, we recommend that MPD establish policy and procedures specific to conflicts of interest and the handling of property and evidence, and again, kind of define the circumstances when conflicts of interest might occur, such as if it's a family member, a friend, or, those items. We require routine disclosure of those to management, such as through an annual disclosure form, kind of similar to other places of the city, kind of going through of, noting what those are, require appropriate management be notified when a potential conflict of interest occurs, and kind of as feasible, identify potential solutions, ways to segregate the items or kind of store them separately, or kind of provide additional, control or oversight of those items to kind of ensure that, there's even no appearance of potential conflicts of interest or along those lines, and also kind of train staff in recognizing those conflicts of interest, and kind of view this as a proactive step, through, fostering, ethical practices, kind of fostering that, view of the property, objective view of the property and evidence warehouse. Management action plan. Management will develop a quality system manual that would cover topics such as impartiality, confidentiality, conflicts of interest, etc. They noted that the Forensic Services Division laboratory already utilizes a manual, and that manual can be utilized and kind of adopted through a property and evidence level to kind of cover the property and evidence unit as well. Ethics training rate specific to property and evidence unit operations is currently being developed, and we implemented this spring. And due date for this one is in September. Next one, kind of another one we noted is continuity planning. So we noted this one, there's not detailed and documented plans, such as disaster recovery or for the property and evidence warehouse that can be utilized in the event of a disruption to service. There have been kind of, through 2020, through, technology outages last year, potential disruptions kind of might arise, and due to the nature of the property and evidence warehouse in terms of the need to secure items safely, there's storage requirements in terms of refrigeration, there's a need to kind of continue operating in the event of disruption through, as items are currently, always kind of being processed and handled. In order that, there's MPD coup plan, when you kind of reviewed it, it's kind of broad. It's kind of developed at a higher level through, through the department, and that kind of not always includes, specific action items for, potential units or divisions, such as property and evidence, and kind of based on that, it was unclear, for example, the prioritization of the property and evidence or unit within kind of the disruption in terms of return to service, kind of how that would handle. And then two, at the property and evidence level, we noted, there's not currently not documented kind of action plans or items such as, if this were to occur, the power go out, for example, we'd, this is kind of that our action plan for those items. A lot of times, it's kind of that not institutional knowledge, kind of that staff knowledge, kind of those communication to kind of determine, how items, how circumstances might be handled, but, we identified opportunities here through inclusion within the COOP plan, through kind of ensuring that they're included, kind of prioritized appropriately within that plan, and then that the kind of at the level that if items would occur, that there can be less time spent kind of figuring out how to respond. So again, we kind of just recommend that MPD management incorporate MPD as well as the forensic division as a whole, larger kind of related to the COOP and other emergency planning and other department key aspects such as personnel systems, lines of communication, and processes, that the unit needs should be outlined and included. And then, as feasible, contingency plans, such as going through, backup storage or kind of backup generators or kind of those other items should be kind of outlined and identified. And then also, property and evidence unit management should also work with the department to develop documented plans to respond to various events. Management action plan for this item. So noted that there's been kind of some collaboration already across the department, including within the assistant chief as kind of the responsive party for the COOP plan, and then also they've kind of already kind of started a draft. COOP specific to property and evidence management utilizes this draft document to continue conversations and obtain funding to implement some of the necessary security measures and update infrastructure in the property and evidence building. Due date for this one is in September. Next one, we kind of have destruction processes. So we noted that, for items, for destruction processes that are off-site, drugs and guns, opportunities to kind of document and kind of more formalize, kind of standardize those procedures. As, most items are disposed of kind of at the property evidence warehouse, also kind of released. Firearms and drugs are both transported currently. And firearms are kind of go through an annual review process where they, management kind of reviews the need to keep an item, whether or not, or keep enough firearm, kind of work with the firearm release unit, kind of others to kind of go through, kind of do about a 5-year look back for those items and kind of update the, if a firearm can be destroyed or released or can be destroyed, then the items are kind of gathered and then transported off-site by staff to be incinerated or kind of be destroyed. Similar process for drugs in that those items are incinerated elsewhere. We noted that I think especially in particular for drugs, opportunities just to again document how those processes works, identify those controls, identify how those processes should be occurring. I think especially there's if there's changes or kind of updates in terms of how to ensuring that there's institutional knowledge and kind of that documentation of this is how those processes are handled. Again, we kind of recommend basically that property and evidence management document the review and destruction processes for those items. Procedure documents should clearly describe the steps involved in the review and the criteria utilized in making disposal determinations. Management action plan, noting that they agree with this finding. Noting that there's been, in the past, kind of there's some of those events kind of shape those current processes. Property evidence unit leadership would document the process for both the gun review and destruction and the drug destruction process. Recommendations from audit would then be followed in the development of these processes with a due date of June. Next, we kind of have a couple of low-risk audit issues. So one we noted was officer training, and kind of has been alluded to, I think, throughout kind of in terms of management responses and kind of elsewhere in the report. We know kind of some of the need for trainings. We noted that there's not regular required refresher training courses in the handling of property evidence or through, entering information in PIMS. If there's kind of updates or kind of changes right now, a lot of times it's through email communication or kind of posting through SharePoint, kind of, how to handle, if there's updates through handling a specific item or updates through the system. We noted that, there's training courses in the academy related to handling of property evidence. Outside of the academy, there's currently not, those require kind of the, those refresher training courses. I think too, as, MPD revamps their training structure in response to the MDHR settlement agreement, kind of there's others, those opportunities to, provide some more effective, kind of more hands-on, through those adult learning methods and kind of through other, methods, kind of just really reminders and training to ensure that, all officers are, aware of kind of, following the same thing, especially in particular, there's free-form boxes, there's different ways that, people might be doing items, kind of ensuring that there's more sustainability and kind of alignment on those processes. Again, we kind of recognize, as they kind of as the city goes through this MDHR process, through some of these, training revamps to, incorporate property events and some of these other topics into that training regimen for officers. Warehouse disposal processes. So this one we noted, if there's oversight and segregation of duties during disposal processes for some valuable items can be enhanced to deter potential fraud, waste, and abuse. So management has already, for items that are more valuable, kind of high risk, such as firearms, drugs, gift cards, cash, narcotics, jewelry, kind of already have established different parameters of how the items are stored and kind of how items are destroyed in terms of, requiring management generally to kind of be involved, or kind of management to handle, kind of, 2 people be involved, kind of just kind of due to the nature of property evidence warehouse and the sizing and resources. It's kind of a, we know that potentially, ideally, we kind of have 2 people involved in terms of updating information, one person destroying an item, one person updating information, PIMs are kind of signing off. But again, that would kind of require staffing and resources, kind of based on kind of the risk value of the item, kind of management has, delegated certain items up along the chain. And kind of, turn to the current setup too, we noted that there's, some mitigating factors in place, such as, the use of, workstations are kind of out in the open of the warehouse, kind of so on it, there's other people kind of are there, and you can be, dispatched if necessary, and then kind of the use of cameras and other items. We just kind of noted that, there, for future use of kind of other items, the potential for ensuring that, there's more segregation duties, kind of controls in place there. Check tracking, kind of another one that we just kind of noted. Just kind of from the property evidence level, we noted that, property evidence releases checks through 2 owners, kind of if items, cash comes in, cash is released back to an owner, a lot of times cash will be released through a check system. So property and evidence works with finance through a process to kind of get a check written, kind of, dispose of it or release it or disperse a check to a person in order that, generally it's kind of kept track and, essentially, property and evidence warehouse right now, when a check is dispersed, scans an image, kind of takes a copy of it. But we know that there's kind of not a centralized, spreadsheet or kind of tracking system that we could, rely on in terms of, identifying, these are the checks that were written, these are the checks that are dispersed, these are the people involved without kind of going through an individual kind of check review process. Finance does kind of on their side of the item of their side of the process and through the reconciliation and through the kind of the review of the bank account, keep track of those details, but you can kind of know the best practice to, on the property and evidence side to, kind of have a more formal kind of information that can be, additionally reconciled without having to go through some of those check details. And then next, so kind of another, this PIMS one, kind of like T1, we noted that, based right now in PIMS through the system, there's, the authorized for disposal section where officers can enter in or people can enter in, that they authorize an item for disposal and they kind of enter in a date. We know that right now that pretty much, anyone with the appropriate commissions can enter, a name into it, kind of enter details into that box. It's kind of described as, due to, the business need and kind of the practices of how the unit works and kind of how the department works in terms of, having, through messages, kind of having, allowing others to kind of enter items through the authorized for disposal by. You can kind of look, for additional confirmation of kind of who entered the information, you can look in through the kind of audit logs within PIMS and kind of, review, who was changing, what information was changed, who's entering it in, but you kind of know that it's kind of part of a process, that if you're relying on kind of, the authorized for disposal by right now, that's currently just kind of the open field and not requiring a particular verification tied to a particular user, which kind of complicates, some of that oversight and kind of, ensuring that items are, that information is kind of accurate and correct in that system. And so again, we kind of, recognize, encourage MPD to kind of explore potential solution in PIMS through, clarifications of fields, kind of updating some, seeing maybe what fields can be locked down or kind of, farther secured and kind of, based on the business need versus on, the limitations within the system that is used right now. So this kind of conclusion, I think we noted, a number of observations related to and opportunities. We noted that too, the property and evidence warehouse has been, going through changes and upgrades even while we were out there. There's a new shelving unit that was kind of implemented. There was new storage boxes that were, kind of being piloted. So we kind of noted that, kind of, stores items lasting through decades and you can kind of tell throughout the decades, how items are handled and stored and kind of in a state of change. Kind of similar to the sexual assault kits, relies a lot on, communication with others and kind of relying on others, relying on officers, investigators, those handling evidence, those checking items out, in order that, sustained communication, collaboration through other parties are kind of necessary to kind of ensure that the process continues operating. And we noted that, property and evidence serves a vital role within the department, working with hundreds of officers or others involved in the department, and involved in the day-to-day intricacies of the work, of the work, as a kind of, in order to start, they encouraged us to kind of visit. We spent a number of days out at the warehouse, just kind of reviewing items, reviewing information, kind of, learning how things are handled, and we kind of appreciate, the willingness to kind of go through the process with, kind of have, these findings and kind of able to, willingness to ensure that things are operating effectively and kind of, have us kind of recommend as we kind of, through our recommendations, potential solutions or gaps where, additional things can be implemented. And that kind of concludes the public portion. So if there's any questions kind of related to this, they can take them right now.
Thank you for that report. Vice Chair Singleton.
Thank you, Chair Payne, and thank you for an excellent report. It's clearly a very large undertaking with a lot of very complex procedures, so I appreciate your work on that and then the work of the Property and Evidence Unit to support that work. I had a question about the evidence continuity finding. Did you come across any instances where the continuity indicators caused any issues for establishing chain of custody within court cases?
We did not. We kind of, discussed kind of with other kind of key stakeholders, kind of this information. And I think the kind of conclusion was, based on case reports, he's been able to kind of establish it so far, but there's been kind of no known so far potential issues related to that not being entered in. But we did kind of vet that farther, and there's a potential risk that there could be potentially especially if that case report of some of that information is not specific or detailed.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Commissioner Williams.
Thank you, Chair Payne. Going back to the warehouse maintenance, specifically around the leaks, did you find that the leaks are compromising the evidence itself, or is the leak happening in kind of a random part of the warehouse?
Yeah, it seems, and I can kind of allude to management as a specific case, but based on kind of our notes, there's kind of, based different locations of the warehouse, and there hasn't been, I think we did kind of note on some boxes, there was some, but in terms, it hadn't leaked through, there's boxes and there's items inside and every package. Through our testing, we didn't, specifically note, any items that have been damaged, but we noted that, there's, as it kind of measured, the tarps, kind of other items, it just kind of spots up, and, the warehouse, the staff through business hours, by management staff, we've been kind of been able to, handle and, respond to those effects quickly.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Commissioner Abene.
Thank you. A couple of questions and comments. One thing, I don't do any work related to this in my day job, but it seems very clear that, and no surprise that, I think that the work that the MPD is doing, I think the processes are working there. The processes in the property and evidence team, they seem to be working pretty well. It's those handoffs, and I think that's always the challenge with any kind of large, complicated organizations. There were some notes made about also on the police side, or the user side, there are many, many users, and training was discussed. And in the report on page 11, the park board police were mentioned, and I know they use this function of the city. I don't think they have any other option. Does the university police use this and Metro Transit, or do they have their own as far possibly?
It's just the park police.
Okay. So then one comment I would have is that there were mentions of signage at precincts and all of that. I don't know if the Park Board Police Department facility has an evidence locker and all of these things. But I think as processes are documented, if they could be mentioned every single time, so they're not missed. And I didn't have an opportunity to, between reading this report and this meeting, to ask our chief of police at the park board. Do you have anything you can say about that, or did you look at that?
We kind of focused within this one, kind of the scope within MPD. I don't management. I can invite them up in terms of specific things to the park board, but they all have access through the property evidence warehouse. Kind of that's where items are submitted through those, through that kind of that main storage location. I'll defer to Tristan, kind of more specifics.
Good morning, and thank you for having us. I'm Kirsten Hammerberg, and I'm the manager of the evidence unit. Chair Payne, thank you. And Madam, the Park Board Police Department, the Park Police Department uses our services to provide evidence and property safekeeping storage. They don't have a storage system at their facility, so we are tasked with taking their evidence, either bicycles or larger items that they leave in their garage. We send a vehicle over to retrieve those, or they come to us directly at the warehouse and drop things off.
Okay.
So that's how we work together on that.
So do they enter anything directly in PIMS?
They do enter items directly into PIMS. The Park Police, I believe, has a specific case report, although we can do an MPD case report in PIMS. It's the University of Minnesota Park Police and Minneapolis Police all have access to PIMS.
Okay.
And so there is some crossover.
Okay, I think they have no other function other than to use the cities. So they don't have their own property and evidence room, essentially. Right. Okay, that's very helpful. So I think as much as possible, being very specific so that whoever maybe is tasked with going out and putting up signage is also making sure that the park police are included. And then the other thing I wanted to comment on is that I do really consider this to be a basic city service. And I actually am not comfortable that there is no, even a carve-out space for the drug testing that they might do preliminarily on site. That seems pretty important to me. And then also, of course, the building maintenance. The evidence is anyone that's anywhere associated with criminal evidence or crime evidence. This is important, and the basic building maintenance, I think, has to be elevated. This needs to be a high quality facility, not a non-maintained facility. So that's it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Williams, were you still up?
Thank you, Chair Payne. I have a couple more questions. As far as the evidence continuity is concerned, how do we know if it's improving or not? And what I mean by that is, how do you know what is and is not being logged in order to understand the trends on improvement?
Yeah, I think Chair Payne, Commissioner, Member Williams, good question. I think kind of that's something that we, in terms of the recommendation, kind of through our process, kind of, thought about it kind of as well in terms of, how it's, in terms of the risk, because it's a unique risk kind of compared to some of the others, which kind of made it a little bit harder to kind of, when we identify it, to, kind of identify, I think, through the potential, future reviews, kind of through, we kind of know this one in a sample and kind of noted, kind of occurring throughout 2018, kind of through currently, I think, future, through management or kind of other reviews of kind of targeted kind of items that were handled within a certain amount, I think through, property and evidence warehouse, kind of through them, staff intake items, notifying noticing items, kind of notifying, with some of those things, was something that, kind of came up early in the discussions, kind of at the property and evidence warehouse, kind of early in our thing, so it's kind of can be kind of noticeable that way. But I think it's going to kind of take, kind of some collaboration, kind of through, some future kind of reviews or kind of efforts to ensure that, as items are handled, as items come in, that, because by the time it gets to the property and evidence warehouse, it generally is too late, to, for that to occur. So I think, something that kind of noted, I kind of made allude to a little bit in the other items I've noted as well, opportunities in the future for some of that work or oversight.
Thank you. And then maybe the last question. I think I was a little maybe confused on specifically issue 12, as well as the continuity plan. So issue 10, you have those labeled as issue 10 is moderate and issue 12 as low. And I'm just trying to figure out the intercontinuity between having issues with leaks and potential damages and not having a business continuity plan, as well as the fact that multiple times officer training is mentioned as a solution to many of the previous issues, yet in issue 12, the officer training itself is considered a low, kind of a low. Maybe just help me understand that.
Yeah, Chair Payne, Commissioner Member Williams, good question. Kind of maybe first, through, I think, issue 10, you start about continuity planning, kind of that escalating. We noted that, there's, if there were to be, as things in the past kind of occurred regarding, events, kind of disruptions, I think 2020 is probably the most, particular one, but there's also kind of a technology outage. Department kind of relies on kind of the chain of command through kind of communication that way. We noted that, there is, some processes and kind of that, some of that information regarding, regarding, or, some of that communication kind of already established, kind of some of those channels and process that have, worked in the past. We kind of noted, it's, in terms of the risk rating, kind of that's where we kind of rated it moderate in terms of, level of severity. But, if there was no, communication comes in those plans, then it would be different risk rating. I think for officer training, that one is a low, just kind of based on kind of the current environment and kind of, the ongoing changes within the training unit. We kind of spoke with them and kind of noted, I think through this year and kind of next year, there's a lot of training. There's a lot of different things that are ongoing regarding, required training as part of the MDHR set agreement and some of those other items. And we kind of noted as part of our risk ratings and part of our recommendations, we want to have something that's feasible, kind of actionable, and don't want to assign out an item that, can't be implemented, kind of be acted upon. I think, through future reviews and kind of through the MDHR work, there's opportunities to kind of, get a more formal picture of the kind of the training unit for officers. I think through our discussions, we noted that, they described, over 100 hours already kind of this year, just kind of complying with the consent agreement. And there's ongoing kind of revamping of training as well through adult learning courses and or methodology that's required as part of the consent decree, and kind of some of those other items that, will kind of involve probably evidence training, kind of some of those specific trainings as well. So in regards to that risk rating, kind of weighed, some of those ongoing changes kind of based with the need. But I think, there's opportunities, I think, through as kind of some of those MDHR kind of is more firmed out, kind of some of those training requirements are more clear and kind of that practices are established, especially in the future, kind of ensure that, those training kind of those processes, are continue and can occur without, some of the other kind of demands in terms of, that right now are on the department.
Any other questions or discussion? Member Chugtai.
Thank you, Chair Payne. I thank you for this presentation. It was incredibly thorough. The report was a page turner, to say the least. But I had a similar question as Commissioner Williams regarding why training was marked as low. And as you were going through your presentation and kind of putting the puzzle together in real time throughout this presentation, I see the primary reason for training being a low risk compared to some of these other risks because, whether it's warehouse maintenance, which is a separate issue from the others, but like items checked out, data entry, conflicts of interest, safekeeping, item disposition, those are things. I'm reading the report and the presentation as there is a need to either make explicit policy or change policy where it exists right now, and in the absence of that, like you can't train people on something that doesn't exist, right? So the first part of we need to have really clear guidelines and policy in place so that we can then train the people that are interfacing with that system on how to use it. But absent the first piece, the clear guidelines and policy existing, we can't train people on how to use and utilize that system. So that was my interpretation of that. Is that accurate? Am I understanding that more accurately?
Chair Payne, Councilmember Chugtai, I think too, as you noted throughout, the specific action items regarding procedures, through some of those initial ones that, in terms of that can be acted upon, kind of that can lead to it, and we always, look at kind of the whole picture and kind of what is involved in that, and I think generally involving anything regarding a policy update, anything regarding procedures, there was that communication, as we stress. In this audit report and kind of other audit reports kind of in the past, that need for, any across the department, across the city as a whole, that communication, that kind of collaboration, kind of some of those, bigger picture items to occur to, really ensure that kind of support and back up, some of those frontline changes.
Thank you. No, my comments are very similar in alignment with this. I was seeing this continuity tracking and the other PIMS data errors is kind of like the Brown M&M test. Does everybody know what the Brown M&M test is? Where, I think in the narrow scope of just the property and evidence process, it's probably a low risk because, especially with the property and evidence staff being that kind of first quality assurance check as they're receiving items. But if we broaden the scope to MPD writ large, it's an indication of either not a process documented or a process that's documented that's not adequately updated or not adequately trained to or have adequate controls around. And I think that's something, especially as we talk about the consent decree coming on and implementing MDHR. I don't know that the public actually really understands how tedious and boring a lot of that work will be in terms of data management and practices and making sure people are trained on doing data entry. But I think that the lack of controls around that or the lack of form field validation within PIMS or other types of feels like technical minutia, but actually ladders up to something much more profound when you start thinking about the implications of not having those systems in place. And so I think, although in the scope of this report, it's probably a low risk, I think that as I put on my council president hat, something that I'm really deeply paying attention to are what are those systemic things that lead to the types of outcomes in other areas of MPD. I had a question about the checkout process. I have to imagine that any jurisdiction in the country could theoretically check out evidence depending on the case, but I would also assume that it's primarily Hennepin County courts that are checking out items. Do we have a sense of kind of how common items are checked out, or like how many different agencies are checking out?
Councilmember Payne, yeah, good question. I can kind of allude to, management, kind of that bigger picture item. I think, through the items that we saw that were checked out, we did note there's a lot of, Hennepin County Attorney's Office, court, kind of, a lot of the local places regarding, potential, city attorney's office, kind of those local ones. But I kind of made it allude to, just and kind of talk a little bit more, kind of maybe about the frequency and practices.
Thank you again, Councilmember Payne. Thank you for the question. Most of the items that are checked out in great detail are to Hennepin County Court because that is where our criminal jurisdiction is and where most court cases are happening. The second level of items that are checked out are typically to the city attorney's office because they're handling the criminal cases that are not taken on by the county. Beyond that, items that are checked out, and these are more for analysis, we have thousands of items that are checked out for the crime lab, for the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and other areas that do analysis, both scientific and otherwise, on the evidence that we're retaining. And so those, I can say, are the primary areas where we check things out. And again, it's thousands of items to all of those entities.
And then a quick follow-up on that. What would be the feasibility of getting into a data sharing agreement so that maybe we could streamline some of the retention schedule verification?
I don't have an IT background, so I can't really answer that question with much certainty. We are working with Hennepin County. They are now incorporating some information about case outcomes into the police reports that are filed in PIMS, but we don't have a solid retention plan, schedule, or anything that transfers over into our system. So that has to be done manually, and that's something that was brought up in the audit report.
Okay, and then one more question while you're up at the podium. Yep. Does PIMS have a fairly robust inventory management component to it, or is that something that's kind of bolted on, or maybe you're kind of working around the limits of what PIMS can do?
In my opinion, it's something that the system that we use has a very broad records management part, and it works really well with police reports because the company that developed it saw the need in police departments to have a silo or a management piece for the property and evidence. In my opinion, that's been something that's been bolted on, but it's been enhanced. So it does a nice job in most things, but as someone working in the field for more than 30 years, there are things that I would like to see it do better.
Very good to know. Thank you. I think I had one more question. I just have to check my notes quick. Yes, I remember. The extreme risk protection orders. I know very new legislation is just coming online last month, but I'm wondering if there's any signals that we have for the type of demand that there might be for that.
Good. Councilmember Payne, or Committee Member Payne, or Committee Chair Payne, I don't believe. I think that's kind of what we allude to. There's kind of that unknown. We kind of inquired through management, kind of others, potential. And I think it's, as we notice, kind of, I think something other agency or departments and agencies are going through across the state. I kind of would imagine as Minneapolis is a larger, but there's also Hennepin County. There's also, potential other ones. I think that's kind of why, we want to know and kind of, kind of track and kind of, figure out kind of before, there is, there's in the past there's, potential for items to be surrendered. There's kind of already, some of that in place, but regarding, specifics of this one, the extreme risk, I think that's, still to be determined.
Okay, so in theory, we may have so much demand that we may need more warehouse space, right? I mean, we'd have, it's a guess at this point though, right?
I believe so.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the public portion? Okay, seeing none. Before I move to close the meeting, I'll recognize the city attorney to provide the legal basis for the requested closed session.
Thank you, Chair Payne. The Minnesota Open Meeting Law, Section 13D.05, Subdivision 3D, permits the closure of a meeting for the purpose of receiving a security briefing to discuss issues related to security systems, emergency response procedures, and to discuss security deficiencies in or recommendations regarding public services, infrastructure, if disclosure of the information discussed would pose a danger to the public safety or compromise security procedures or responses. Staff has determined that the disclosure of some of the information contained within the property and evidence audit report could compromise security procedures or responses. As such, it meets the requirements of Section 13D.05, Subdivision 3D, necessary to allow for the closure of the meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Trammell. With that, I move that our public meeting be closed as authorized under the provisions of the open meeting law as stated by the city attorney. May I have a second to that motion? Second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed say nay. That carries, and we will now close the public portion of our meeting and convene in closed session. For the viewing public, I will note that the broadcast of this meeting will continue and the audit committee will convene in public after we have concluded the closed session. Thank you.
I just teamed you.
Tech team, we're ready. The time is now 12:11, and the Audit Committee has reconvened in open session following our closed session. I'll ask the clerk to call the roll to verify a quorum.
Committee Member Abeni,
Present.
Chuktai,
Present.
Williams,
Present.
Vice Chair Singleton,
Present.
Chair Payne.
Present.
There are 5 members present.
Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Seeing no further questions or comments from committee members, I will move to direct staff unless there are any other questions or comments. Member Abene.
I apologize, Chair Payne, but one more item related to the prior to closing of the meeting. I just wanted to make a comment about the cannabis piece of the report, that I hope, and maybe this is totally pedantic, but that your legislative agenda, the city's legislative agenda's got this item on it in addition to, I'm certain you have other items as well. The legislature, I know, is looking to kind of remedy some of the gaps or omissions. So just wanted to make that comment.
Thank you
Thanks.
for flagging that, and I do know that it is one of the priorities of the city. So with that, seeing no further questions or comments from committee members, I will move to direct staff to publish the report. Is there any further discussion from committee members beyond that? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say nay. That carries, and the report has been received and filed, and will be published today. Seeing no further business before us and without objection, I will declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you, everyone.